from reverence to revival to revolution. Okay? We're going to wrap up today. Now, I know that I've told you this the last couple of weeks and I have failed to deliver on my promise, as I said, but I am hoping to be done in time for you to have a Q&A session. Okay? I'm hoping to be done. You know, we'll see. We'll see. As we begin, let's say this prayer together. Father, as we reflect on the birth of our nation and your providence in establishing it, what we know not teach us, what we have not give us, what we are not make us, for your Son's sake. Amen. By the way, in 2 weeks from today, next week we're not meeting in here because it's just the one celebration service. But 2 weeks from today, we're going to begin a study in the Beatitudes. Okay? I don't think it's going to be fun. I don't think it's going to be fun. I know it's going to be fun. But I think it'll be meaningful for you. Okay? The Beatitudes. The Beatitudes. Just a remembrance. These are the parameters that we've used, the parameters that we're still using today in order to study this particular subject. Okay? And today, the title of the session is Preach On! Preach On! Last week, the quote of the day that we ended the day with was, are you ready? There's no use crying about it. Cousin America has run off with a Presbyterian parson, and that is the end of it. Spoken on the floor of Parliament by Horace Walpole. It was the attitude of King George that the little skirmish they were involved in with the Americans, he referred to it as the Presbyterian War. Okay? Because one of their biggest problems was not military, but it was the heart of the people. And he believed the heart of the people had been stirred and motivated by their faith. Specifically preachers of the faith that he referred to as, and many other British officials referred to, as the Black Regiment. The Black Robe Regiment, if you look up Black Robe Regiment or just Black Regiment, you'll find it referenced. The term Black Robe Regiment is a fairly new term for the historians have applied to what was going on. But the Black Regiment was a term that was used during that time. It was used as a derogatory term. Kind of like Yankee Doodle went to town was a derogatory thing that the British used to talk about these, slack-jawed, revolutionaries and all that kind of stuff. And of course, what did we do? We took it and went, yeah, baby, we Yankee Doodles, Yankee Doodle. And we started singing that song every time we went into it and made them mad as hornets. Red-coated hornets. Anyway, it was also used by the Loyalists in the colonies. You realize there were a lot of people who weren't in favor of all of this revolution business. They were known as Loyalists. They were loyal to the British Crown. Okay?
Well, it might be interesting to know that George Washington's mother was one of them.
Yeah. As a matter of fact. Oh, George. By the way, there's a movie that's coming out that I'm anxious to see. I don't know whether it's going to be any good or not, but I'm anxious to see it. It's about George Washington as a boy, and you find out a lot about his mother in that movie that's coming out. I think it's called Young George. I'm not.
Yeah.
What? Young Washington?
Did he chop down the cherry tree?
There ain't no cherry tree. I don't know whether that's in the movie or not. But anyway, they use the term to refer to pastors who were preaching things that supported the revolution. Okay? Now, a lot of what they were preaching was just individualism. You are before God responsible. There is no one above God, including the king. They were preaching things like this. Okay? So they were instilling in their congregants an understanding of and a desire for true liberty. and they also help to see their cause as a just one. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to talk about the Black Regiment, and then we're going to look at a couple of sermons. Okay? It was actually coined by a loyalist, a British loyalist, Peter Oliver. He was, by the way, a lot of the royalists, they were royalists because they had power in England, and they were losing power here. He was Chief Justice of Massachusetts, the last royal Chief Justice of Massachusetts. And we're going to talk about the events that led up to the evacuation of Boston. Okay? That happened in 1776. But during the evacuation of Boston, when the British were having to hightail it out of town, okay, because the Americans are sitting up there with all these big cannons that they had brought in and all that, and so they were ready to take them out. So they said, we got to get out of Dodge. So they evacuated Boston, got out of town, right? And Oliver said about that evacuation, but as little as the Red Regiments performed, in other words, a bunch of cowards took off, as little as the Red Regiments performed, the Black Regiment played its artillery to some purpose, and the pulpit, drum ecclesiastic, was beat with fist instead of a stick. And what he was saying was, those dang preachers got these kids so riled up, they weren't going to be stopped. Pretty cool, huh? Well, let me tell you what they did. They preached. That's what they did. They preached. They proved it in their words and in their deeds, but they proved it first in their words. They preached sermons, and these sermons struck home. So much so that some of these sermons actually made it into our founding documents. And you say, huh? Let's look at some. By the way, I'm going to give you, 2 or 3, 4 examples, something like that. There are dozens of these. Okay? First one. From John Wise, pastor in Ipswich, Massachusetts. It was known as the birthplace of American independence because it was over there that they first started opposing taxation policies. Okay? But he was preaching back in 1717. You say, well, he couldn't have been the one that Peter Oliver was referring to. Oh, yeah. We include him in that group just because his sermons were still creating the havoc. One of his sermons was reprinted in 1772. Okay? In it, he said, the end of all good government is to cultivate humanity and promote the happiness of all and the good of every man in his rights, his life, his liberty, his estate, honor, etc. Also, the natural equality of man amongst men must be duly favored. I don't know whether you remember this from the Declaration of Independence, but it says that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You remember that? You remember that? Huh? Those things were being preached from the pulpit. Those things were being preached from the pulpit. John Wise was just one of them, but he was one of the wise ones. Get it? Let's go on. Jonathan Mayhew. I put their pictures up there when I had them. I don't have them for Wise, but I put them up there because I was like, what harm could this guy possibly do, right? I mean, look at it. What harm could this guy do? Jonathan Mayhew, pastor in Boston, Massachusetts. Okay? He said, okay, I have that wrong up there. I can't remember the date. It says down at the bottom of that, I think. Never mind. Forget what I said about preaching. I just filled in the wrong stuff. When no such God When no such good end can be answered by submission, the end of government is totally reversed. They are no longer to be regarded as the ministers of God, but rather submission is no longer a duty, but a crime. What he was saying was, there comes a point when we do not submit. There comes a point when under God, it's wrong for us to submit. One of the things that they complained about the Black Regiment was that they gave just cause for the revolution. Okay? In the Declaration, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Now, I know it's not the same word, the actual word. Some of them are the actual same words, but you understand? It's the process, it's the thought, it's the way they were thinking. It's the way these revolutionaries were coming at this whole thing. Okay? Let's do another one, shall we? How about Samuel West? Samuel West preached a sermon in Dartmouth, Massachusetts in 1776. The form of government is a matter of human compact and institution. The state of nature is a state of freedom. Therefore, we form a social compact to promote the common good, maintain justice, and secure peace. You ever read the Constitution? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, that's peace, do ordain and establish this Constitution. Guys, here's the thing. These guys were preaching stuff, and it wasn't just them. This stuff was coming through the pulpits and energizing the people. Energizing the people. Saying, you know what? We can't worship the way we want. We can't live our lives the way God intends us to live them. Wow, we've got to do something. We need to do something. Well, it wasn't just words. Every once in a while, they got into the act. Okay? Some of these guys got into the act. For example, Jonas Clark. Jonas Clark. By the way, I hope you remember the evacuation of Boston because it's coming up. Okay? Jonas Clark was pastor in Lexington, Massachusetts. April 18th, 1775. Jonas was at his house. A couple of guys dropped by. A couple of his buds. Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Remember them? Remember them? They stopped by. They were discussing what was going on because they knew that British were amassing their troops, right? And they were trying to figure out, okay, where are they coming? When are they coming? What are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? They were discussing tactics and procedures and all that kind of stuff. This pastor, Jonas Clark, had a meeting in his house, and they were wanted men. In other words, just having them there put him at risk. You understand what I'm saying? Because the crown was after these two. Samuel Adams was known as the firebrand of the Revolution. And John Hancock actually was a firebrand. I mean, he was nuts. But it's another story entirely. I mean, he was... So, he's talking with these guys. While they're talking to him, guess who shows up on his midnight ride? Remember that? In the midnight ride of Paul Revere, one of his final destinations was Jonas Clark's house, where he knew Hancock and Samuel Adams were going to be. Because he wanted to inform them if it was one by land or two by sea. By the way, which one was it?
Well, they had to come by sea.
Thank you. There was two by sea. They were coming across the harbor. Okay? Which really played, I'm throwing this in for free. Okay? I'm throwing this in for free, which was really a big mistake. It was April. But dang, it was already cold, and they'd already had a cold snap. And so those poor British soldiers were getting off the boats in the muck and the mire and all that kind of stuff in frozen water. And not only having to get off, they had to deal with it through the night. And so by the next morning, anyway, but that's another story entirely. So here we go. Paul Revere rides in, lets them know which way they're coming, and they say, are you ready for this? This is where Hancock gets some of his. He went and started getting his sword on. I mean, he was strapping up, man, getting suited up for armor, with his armor for battle. And Clark and Adams are telling him, no, you kid. He said, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to stand on the green and face them. And no, look, yeah, I understand what you're doing. But Samuel Adams convinced him that they needed to book it out of town, which was the right thing to do. They were in charge of this operation. If they had killed either one of them, it would have been devastating to the cause. You understand what I'm saying?
Like taking out a general.
Exactly. It would have been devastating to the cause. So convinced, they left, but before they left, they asked Jonas Clark, said, listen, do you have people in your church that are ready to fight? His response, I have trained them for this very hour, that they would fight and if need be, die also under the shadow of the house of God. Wow. And they did. They went out on the green. They met those British troops as they were coming in and died for the cause of liberty. The reason I wanted you to keep the evacuation in mind is because later on, they get it all together, Hancock and all of them, they get it all together. And with a lot of other events that take place in between there, eventually they come back and they chase the British out in that evacuation. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm getting carried away here. Okay. How about James Caldwell? I love this guy because he brought music into the situation. Okay? They were at the Battle of Springfield, which America won, but they had run out of wadding for their muskets. Okay? They had run out of wadding for the muskets. So James goes into town, goes to a church, gathers up a bunch of hymnals, a lot of which were written by Isaac Watts. You remember Isaac Watts? He's the guy that signed and helped publish Jonathan Edwards' sermon, Sinners in the Hands of it. So anyway, he came back with these hymnals, and he said, tear those pages out, boys. He threw them down on the ground and said, give them Watts, boys, give them Watts. And they used the pages for wadding in those muskets, and won the battle. I love it, firing music at them. So that's James Clark. Well, actually, the music probably never got anywhere near them. But anyway, you understand what I'm saying. I got one more. John Peter Gabriel of Muhlenberg. He's a preacher. He's standing up in the pulpit. He's preaching from the book of Ecclesiastes. You know, the one that says to everything there is a season. You know the book, right? He got to the point that says a time for war and a time for peace. He declared that the time for war had come. He yanked off his clerical robe, threw it down, and underneath it, he had on his military gear, and he said, it's time to fight. And he raised an entire regiment that fought under Washington. Now, You understand? Do you understand why the British saw these guys as a problem? They were the real deal. They were not Mickey Mousing around with any of this stuff. They were the real deal, and they made it happen. They made it happen. They had people that were their parishioners who were willing to die for the cause. Wow. You know, a couple of weeks ago I said there was one signer of the Declaration that was a Baptist. Right? Remember that? And that there weren't any signers of the Constitution that were Baptists. I felt slighted. You know, in the face of the fact that the Baptists were underrepresented, you know, in the Constitution. Well, we were underrepresented. I mean, half of them should have been Baptists in the Declaration. I mean, might not have ever gotten it done, but that's another story entirely. I want to give you a couple of Baptists you can point to. Now, this primarily has to do with the Bill of Rights. You know, we haven't said a lot about the Bill of Rights, okay? But there's a dude, Isaac Bacchus, okay? I've got his sermon up here because part of his one of his sermons made it into the Bill of Rights in a sense. Isaac Bacchus was Baptist pastor in Middleborough, Massachusetts. He preached in 1773, God has appointed two kinds of government which are distinct in their nature, church and state. And every person has an unalienable right to exercise his own conscience in religious matters without civil interruption. Wow. Powerful. In the Bill of Rights, First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. He wasn't the only one. It's so cool. Connor sent me an email this week, and he sent me an article that I couldn't access because, well, you know, he's rich and can pay for subscriptions to things like the New York Times. But that's another story entirely. But Connor, our Irish-born, Irish heritage American citizen, you are a citizen. I mean, I think you told me that, right? is the one who sent me a note reminding me about this. And I'd already decided that I would include him, but I went back because Connor sent me the thing on John Leland. I thought, I'm gonna look a little bit deeper. And I found a little bit about the discussion. I knew about him in Madison. I knew what happened there, okay? But I found out a little bit more about the discussion. See, what was going on, the Baptists were treated bad. They were discriminated against. They really were, by other Christians. The Baptists were not treated nicely, okay? Some of the Baptists were jailed just for being Baptists by the Puritans, okay? Because what they were standing for wasn't right. Well, these Baptists are saying, okay, look, this is going to be a free country with freedom of religion. We got to stand up for it because ain't nobody else going to stand with us. And so John Leland was very influential amongst the Baptists in Virginia, okay? So much so that when it came time for ratification of the Constitution, he had decided that he was going to be run to be one of the delegates so he could go in there, and they were going to try to get a couple of more in there too. But they were going to go in and they were going to disrupt the ratification, Virginia's ratification of the Constitution, if they didn't have a Bill of Rights that said there was going to be freedom of religion. He was running against James Madison. And apparently, he was doing well enough that James came to him and said, "Can we talk?" Okay? They met together under an old oak tree. Right? I love the name of this town. Right outside of Gum Spring. Right outside of Gum Spring. By the way, that's an AI. That's not a photograph that's taken to anything. Okay, I made that so that they met. Madison understood where he was coming from. And he said, if you will throw your support and if you will encourage other Baptists to support me, I promise you that we will have a Bill of Rights, and I promise you that that Bill of Rights will contain a statement on freedom of religion. And so Leland backs off, gets the support. Madison is elected. Madison goes. You see, here's the deal. The thing, all it needed was 7 out of 13 colonies to ratify it. By the time they had this conversation, those 7 had already ratified. There had already been 7 that had ratified it. And you say, well, it was a done deal anyway. It wasn't even. Oh, no. Virginia held 20% of the population of America. Virginia had all kinds of major folks from there. You ever heard of Washington? You ever heard of Jefferson? Yeah. You want me to go down the list? And if Virginia had said, no, we're not going to do it, the thing would have fallen apart. If Virginia had voted against the Constitution, I'll guarantee all of those others would have backed off and said, no, you know what? If Virginia's not in it, we can't pull it off anyway. We can't make it happen. So Virginia was key. Virginia was key. Virginia was a linchpin in the operation. He goes. They vote to ratify the Constitution, which, by the way, was ratified unanimously by the 13 colonies. Okay? But that, too, could have been because of Virginia's stepping in when they did, taking in the last couple of holdouts. But we might not have had that First Amendment. We might not have had that Bill of Rights had it not been for Bacchus and John Leland. So, Baptist, give yourself a pat on the back. Okay, I didn't mean it literally, but you know what I'm saying. Okay. So, okay, I promise. I'm going to go through this one quick, if I can. There was one guy who was considered part of the Black Regiment that was like the general of the Black Regiment. Now, they didn't have a general, but if they had, this was the dude, okay? This was the guy because of what he said, but not only because of what he said, because of what he did. His name was John Witherspoon. John Witherspoon was president of Princeton, okay? President of Princeton. And he was the only clergyman and the only college president, too, to sign the Declaration of Independence, right? I love this story about him when he was in the Continental Congress. When they were dragging their feet about declaring independence, he said that America was not only ripe for the measure, but in danger of rotting for the want of it. Strong words, John Witherspoon. But what he did in his sermons, he laid these things out, but he also developed it through Princeton. He laid out a blending, if you will, of the age of reason and the precepts of the Great Awakening and religious faith. And he wove them together to show how they were not incompatible, but yet reason actually pointed to faith. You understand? Yes, sir.
There was a name for that. It actually was started in Scotland. It was called common sense realism.
Yes,
and
yes.
It was initially developed by a philosopher by the name of Thomas Reid.
Yes.
R-E-I-D.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you. I'm telling you guys, this was a major thing because you remember what we talked about, what happened in France when the age of reason won out? And look at what happened to them. You know, look at what happened to them. They lost their heads over it. Literally. Anyway, tough room. Dang. Okay. But that's not the only thing John Witherspoon did. As the president and also mentor and teacher in Princeton, he affected the lives of these people. Just glance through that. One president of the United States, that was Madison. One vice president, Aaron Burr. Now, you remember we talked about Aaron Burr, how when he died, he would not profess Jesus. But still, he grew up in the faith, he understood the faith, and he studied with Witherspoon because of his understanding of reason and the biblical truth being combined. Yes?
Well, I think that Aaron Burr was also a grandson or a great-grandson of Donovan Edwards.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. Which is, y'all remember the Presbyterian that came, tried to convince him to, on his deathbed, to accept Jesus, that he responded to very poorly. But he was doing it for Jonathan Edwards' sake as much as anything, trying to convert him. So, 10 cabinet officers, 21 Harvard, Yale, Princeton equivalents or presidents, early university presidents. Isn't that awesome? He didn't just affect Princeton University. You with me? You realize who these people are that are coming out of all of this? And by the way, I want to remind you that those universities, including Harvard and Yale, and the ones we talked about last week, a couple of weeks ago, Dartmouth, and they were Christian institutions.
Well,
What?
a bit of a caveat there is that by 1803, Harvard was a Unitarianist.
Right. Yeah, they were moving away early. Okay? 28 U.S. senators. Isn't that amazing? 37 judges, including 3 in the Supreme Court. 49 congressmen and 12 members of the Continental Congress. You understand why I call him the general? That guy right there. That guy probably affected more of the thought, the Christian thought of the time than any other single person. So your quote of the day, I went back to Bacchus for the quote of the day. Okay? As God is the only Lord of conscience, so every person has an unalienable right to exercise his own judgment and conscience in religious matters without civil interruption, to leave every man to think and act for himself in these important concerns is a privilege which cannot be given up to any earthly power, whatever. Now, I'm closing with this quote, and yes, you're going to have a little question and answer, short, but you're going to have it. I'm going to close with this thought. That word privilege that he used. It's a privilege. Well, let me tell you something, folks. We as Americans today do not make full use of the privilege that we have to share the gospel. I'm thrilled with what Melissa has brought together. You realize that in going out, there's going to be times that you're going to have an opportunity to talk with people, just casually. Just say, hey, we're passing these out, and you're going to have opportunities to talk with people casually. I'm thrilled that she's doing that because we have the freedom in this country to do that. And she's taking advantage of that, or not she, but the whole, nationwide thing. They're taking advantage of the privilege that we have. And that's something we need to take away this time of year. So what questions and our answers do you have? You might have some answers. Any questions about anything we've covered? Coming to America, pilgrims and all that?
Was the shot heard around the world by Jonas Clark?
No, it was not shot by him. He was there. As a matter of fact, Jonas Clark was not on the battlefield. And he didn't die. As a matter of fact, he lived to a ripe old age. But no one knows who shot the first shot.
Well,
Yes.
That's kind of saying kind of out of context of what's going on. The British Army was a cultural faux pas when they were going into churches. The reason they were going into churches was to get the militia arms out of churches for restored.
Right.
So the idea, A for effort, but that for execution kind of thing. The second thing is, on the green before
Lexington Green, yeah.
There was somebody selling cider or some kind of alcoholic beverages on both sides.
Yeah?
So, the reason for that shot, I would say, probably came from the Colonial side versus the Red Coast, because they would have been very, very well disciplined.
Yeah.
I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect somebody got a little bit inside and said, let's go ahead and start this now.
Let's get this show on the road, baby.
So is the green like a pasture? What is it?
It's kind of a courtyard area.
Oh, and just one other thing. Yeah, it was a little bit of a mess there on the green. However, that's only half of the story. The other half is as they chased them, and Captain Parker got revenge like umpteen different times as they retreated towards Boston. Then I think General Gage on the British side bringing the artillery up to the heights.
Right.
Boston,
Right.
they gave them covering fire to get out. Last, because they were being
Right.
ambushed every turn in the road. I mean, they were losing people. One guy, 79-year-old man, forgot his name. Anyway, he gathered his saber, 2 dueling pistols, and a musket, and took on the entire British Army in his front yard. He literally, he fired all the weapons and got the slashing and stabbing. And so when they finally got up to him after the British Army finished with him, he'd been shot like 5 times, bayoneted, part of his lower jaw was blown off, and he lived for 10 more years. That's the original guy that said, "Get off my lawn." One reason I was very interested in the events that led up to that, because a lot of the officers, British officers, afterwards reflected on what they saw on the way.
Yeah.
There's lots of military-aged men that are just milling about in different places. Also, most of the weapons have been taken out of the church beforehand and put in rows and gardens and
Right.
fields. So basically, they went in there and got nothing that they really needed.
Right. By the way, there is a fabulous story that you need to look up sometime. John, you can probably remember the name of the guy that did it, that went up to Ticonderoga and brought back 300 cannons. You know who that? They were the cannons that they used in Boston to eventually drive them out. Knox, it was Knox. Henry Knox. Yeah, it was Henry Knox. Brought 300 cannons of every shape and size.
Those artillery, heavy cannons, so they sent a heavy guy to get them.
They did send a big dude. He was a big boy. I read his measurements, and he's about my size. He was about my height and my girth, which has a 3 in the front of it, but we're not going any further than that. Okay. Any other questions? Comments? Come on.
I got one.
Yes, sir.
I think the reason why John Hancock was the first one to put on his weapons and go out was because his insurance was paid off.
Hey, Bob?
We're going to have a
The first treasurer of the United States.
I know. Is that right?
Yep. They still have to tell people not to do that.
Well, guys, let me tell you, from the time we began this, I had one goal in mind, one and one only, and that was that you might see in some shape or form how Christianity, and specifically the Great Awakening, affected the founding of our nation. And I hope that at some point something struck home, because boys and girls, you hear it all the time about how we were not founded on Christian principles. Well, let me tell you, I'll be the first to tell you, we do have a secular form of government, of the people, by the people, for the people. We do. that government lived we wait in hope for the Lord. He is our hope. In Him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in His holy name. And this is our final prayer. O Lord, may your unfailing love rest upon us, even as we put our hope in you. Let it be, Father. Amen.